Chapter 13, in Kadic's Trenches. "You're the one who organized all this?" Yumi said while looking at Odd, eyes round as saucers. He grinned from ear to ear. "Well, at first I was scared and worried about our friends, but afterwards I asked myself, what would Jeremy do now? And so everything just came to me like that." The girl also smiled and opened the physics laboratory door for him. Odd stepped in lightly, a roll of paper under his arm. They were all meeting there, his parents, Yumi's parents, Ulrich's father, Jeremy's father, the principal, Professor Hertz, Jim Morales, and Richard Dupuis. In short, he had a large audience. Michael Belpois was sitting hunched over in a corner, but Walter Stern didn't look any better. "The mood's a bit dark, isn't it?" Odd murmured to Yumi, before going on alone towards the principal's chair, where he cleared his throat and made a low bow. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in the history of my adventures and misadventures as a student at this school, I'll now be the one who teaches you." Nobody laughed. He didn't even get a half smile. His mother, Marguerite, frowned, as if to tell him to stop clowning around. I see that your sense of humor is somewhat lacking. In that case, I'll get straight to the point." Odd took the large roll of paper out from under his arm and asked Yumi to help him tape it to the blackboard with scotch. It was a map of Kadic showing every building. The boy took a long stick from beside the blackboard and used it to gesture to the map. "This, as you can tell, is our school. After having discovered last night, when defying the danger, that our friend had been despicably kidnapped..." Yumi tugged on his arm and Odd sighed. Nobody understood that this was his grand debut as an actor. He decided to make his tone a little less dramatic. "Professor Hertz and I got in contact with Dido. We know that Jeremy was kidnapped by the Green Phoenix, probably by a certain Grigory Nictopoulos, who we have nicknamed the Man with Dogs. The very same man who used the memory snatching machine on my father and Yumi's parents. Among other things, it seems that this man has neutralized 3 of Dido's secret agents who were keeping the factory where the supercomputer is under surveillance." Odd observed his audience. He had their undivided attention. He felt very pleased with himself. "We need to prepare to defend Kadic at all costs. We know that a heap of soldiers have gathered at the old factory, and for the moment, Dido would rather avoid having her men intervene. The thing is, seeing the results, basically, the main worry is that this place is like a sieve." Odd was absolutely certain of this. Just after having called Dido, he, Hertz, and Jim did reconnaissance from one end of Kadic to the other. Finding out where Grigory Nictopoulos got in hadn't been difficult. The boiler room door was always open and the cover of the manhole leading into the sewers had been displaced. "We need to block the entrance to the sewers here and here," Odd explained. "Right here, there's a manhole that provides access to the factory and which is directly connected to the factory. Right here, there's a manhole that provides access to the park and which is directly connected to the factory. And then there's a passage that leads to the Hermitage. We need to protect the walls and close the gates. Also, we need to organize an expedition to the Hermitage because we'll need the scanner, and so getting to it is of top priority, given that it's our only way of bringing Aelita, Ulrich, and Eva back to reality. This could be a tough job, and we're going to need all of your help, and from the rest of the students. If there are no objections, as soon as we finish this meeting, Yumi and Jim will go to wake the students and prepare the first line of defense. As for us, Mr. Belpois, Richard, and I will go to the Hermitage." Odd caught his breath and waited for a moment. "Any questions?" he finally concluded. He chuckled softly. He'd always wanted to say that. Memory had freed his wrists, but his arms were still tied behind his back. The woman gently led him out of the room. Jeremy leaned too far forward at first, almost fell over, and had to take 2 quick steps to regain his balance. He held his breath. The director's office led out onto a metallic walkway suspended several meters above the floor. The area below them hadn't really changed since the last time Jeremy had been there. All over the place were armed soldiers and large steel containers with the Green Phoenix symbol engraved on their sides. Beside the elevator leading to the underground floor, someone had erected an enormous Bedouin tent, a green, nomadic-style tent with pegs driven directly into the cement. Jeremy and Memory descended to the ground floor, using a comfortable, slow-moving escalator put in place of the factory's old staircase, which had been destroyed over time. The boy noticed a man with very short hair dressed in a leather jacket waiting for them just beside the tent. He held a double leash, also leather, tightly in his hands, attached to the collars of his 2 dogs, 2 large and muscular Rottweilers. "Grigory," Jeremy greeted him coldly. He smiled only with his mouth, a gesture that didn't show in his eyes even for a moment. "The boss is waiting for you." "The boss is waiting for you," he said before addressing Jeremy. It's a pleasure to see you again, Runt." The teen tried to hide his fear. I finally know the man who managed to erase himself from security footage while he prowled around the Hermitage at night," he said, staring him right in the face. Grigory winked at him, without appearing offended. "Yes, you caught me. You're very crafty kids. But that is no longer of any importance. We've already won. I was just about to give your friends a little surprise." Jeremy tried to take a step forward, but Memory seized him by the binding around his elbows, preventing him from moving. The boy rushed at the man, and at the precise moment of his strike, he felt the length of plastic tighten around his arms. What do you think you're doing? You can't... Grigory didn't respond and limited himself to shaking the leashes as if they were whips, and with that he and his two villainous mongrels moved away from the tent. Don't even think about messing around with that man, understood? Memory said to Jeremy, moving to face him while regarding him harshly. He's too dangerous. The inside of the tent was filled with an intense aroma of sweet spices, and the floor was covered in thick carpets. Hannibal Mago was waiting for them, seated with his legs crossed on a pile of cushions. He wore an orange three-piece suit and a hat of the same color. His fingers were covered in rings and his feet were bare. Mago, sir, Memory said. I've brought you the boy, Jeremy. The woman left the tent after giving a bow, and Jeremy was left alone with the mysterious man, Hannibal Mago, the boss of the Green Phoenix. The man who had kidnapped Anthea several years earlier. The boy decided to greet him using his real name. Hello, Mr. Mark Hollenbach. Mago raised his head, though his eyes remained hidden under the brim of his hat. Jeremy could see gold canine teeth inside his mouth, shining in a threatening fashion. Call me by that name again, Mago murmured, and they will be the last 2 words you ever say. The threat hung in the air for a moment like a dense cloud. How do you know who I am? Mago then asked, inclining his head towards Jeremy. 10 years ago, the young man said, shrugging his shoulders, when Professor Hopper moved to Paris, someone gave him a file about you. It was Professor Hertz, of course, during the time when she was still Major Steinbach. Jeremy had witnessed the scene when Alita went into the first level of her father's virtual journal in the Hermitage. The person who kidnapped Anthea, or Alita's mother, as she's also known, and now that I've seen Memory, I made the connection, Jeremy concluded in a defiant tone. Mago began to laugh, producing a sound that would make one's hair stand on end, like the squeaking of chalk against a blackboard. Grigory was right when he said you're a resourceful kid. So everything must be clear to you. You already know that Memory is really Hopper's wife. You already know that Memory is really Hopper's wife? That's fantastic. You've saved me from doing a lot of work. Jeremy felt beads of sweat begin to drip down his forehead. This man seemed completely crazy. Well, let's get straight down to business, my young friend. I came to this horrible factory to enter Lyoko, but I've run into a small problem. Jeremy couldn't help but smile. Your men can't enter the virtual world. They're adults. Seeing the expression on the man's face, Jeremy understood that Hannibal Mago absolutely hated being interrupted, but the man then nodded. I'd already tried with about 20 soldiers, but none of them managed to take even a tiny step while there. It seems that Hopper is still the only man capable of surviving on Lyoko. Jeremy said nothing. How much did Mago know about Hopper's past? Did he know that by entering Lyoko, the professor had lost his body, transforming into pure energy? As it happens, young man, you're the one who will be entering Lyoko. You will follow my instructions precisely, and you will do me a little favor. The task will only take a moment, you'll see. You just have to open a certain door for me. A door? Jeremy reeled before shaking his head. I'm very sorry, he said, but I can't go to Lyoko. In reality, he had done so several times, but it had been an unpleasant and shameful experience that he hadn't the slightest intention of repeating. It was clear that he wasn't built to be a hero. He was much more talented at staying at the controls, guiding his friends through the virtual world. Mago raised his head, and this time 2 icy eyes peered out from under his hat, piercing Jeremy's like daggers. His gold canine teeth shone in the gloom. I didn't ask you to go to Lyoko, he whispered. I ordered you to. Otherwise, your girlfriend, who has already lost her father, will lose the last of her family. And you don't want that to happen to Alita, do you? You, Jeremy said, taking a step back. You'll assassinate Memory if I don't help you? Mago clapped his hands loudly against his thighs, brimming with satisfaction. I like you, kid. You understand everything the first time around. The park at Kadic Academy was silent, the trees already warmed by the rosy morning sun. Yumi and Jim Morales slid the manhole cover to the side. Professor Hertz was waiting for them a few steps away, wearing a miner's helmet that she'd found goodness knows where in a large backpack. Perfect, puffed Yumi when the heavy metallic cover was dropped onto the tall grass, revealing the dark shaft leading to the sewers. Jim cautiously sniffed the nauseating stench wafting from the pipe and shook his head. And you screwed around down there, escaping the dormitory in the middle of the night? The principal should expel you, not put you in control. This is not the time, Jim, Professor Hertz tried to appease him. We've got important work to do. Yumi was the first one to head down into the darkness. She descended several meters, hanging onto the iron rungs embedded in the wall and being very careful not to slip. When her feet could no longer find another rung, she understood that it was time to jump, and she let herself fall. She landed not much further down with a path, and leapt to the side to avoid getting her shoes soaked in the wastewater. She took the torch from her belt and turned it on, projecting a cone of light along the sewer conduit. Their old skateboards and scooters were still leaning against one of the curved walls. She heard someone cry, "Help!" and Jim fell down like a sack of potatoes, ending up landing with his legs in the air right in the middle of the pipe. The teacher got up in a single jump and almost gave the impression of having bounced off the ground after his fall, but it was too late. His pants, jacket, and shirt were covered in unnameable liquids. "Disgusting!" he exclaimed, "and such a nasty odor! Gross!" Hertz arrived not long after and made an elegant jump, not even wetting the toes of her shoes. We can get to Kadic's boiler room that way," Yumi said to Jim while signaling behind her. "And in front of us is the path to the old factory, which forks off a little further down, also leading to the Hermitage." Professor Hertz observed one of the walls attentively. Yumi's gaze followed the beam of light coming from her head torch. It illuminated the small brass plaque on which the words "Green Phoenix" could be read. The professor grumbled. "Well, it all fits together, right?" Yumi said. "You and Hopper got help from Walter Stern, Ulrich's father, and when he bought the old factory, he constructed the pathways. I also find it funny that he used the symbol of the Green Phoenix to mark the entry and exit points of the labyrinth, and he didn't even know where the supercomputer was." Hertz smiled at her. It was as if the insufferable stench of the sewers didn't bother her at all. "I wonder whether these tunnels are isolated from the rest of the city sewers," the professor thought aloud. "Why?" Jim immediately asked, tired of being left out of the conversation. "Because I really don't like the idea of soldiers being able to get close to my students, and Mego's men seem very good at fooling electronic alarms." "But if it were possible to isolate the labyrinth from the rest of the city sewers," Yumi commented, also beginning to smile, "and seeing as the river isn't far away," she may have understood the professor's plan. They exchanged a gesture of collusion. Odd pressed on through the tall grass. Behind him were Michael Belpaw, slightly hunched over, his tweed suit full of creases and a serious expression on his face. Richard, by his side, struggled under the weight of an enormous cardboard box carrying the materials necessary to deconstruct the scanner. The young man was already covered up to his knees in mud. "You sure you don't want me to give you a hand?" Odd asked him. "Yeah, couldn't be better. Sorry we couldn't take the road, but I thought that it would be better to take a shortcut through the park. I don't want to run into any surprises." Kadic's park was separated from the Hermitage garden by a simple metal fence. They would pass through it using a large hole not far out of their way. Once they'd finished with the scanner, Odd had to remember to warn Hertz. The boy walked a little faster between the trees, shivering from the intense cold. He arrived at the manhole and saw that it was open, revealing a vertical tunnel that became lost in the underground darkness. Yumi, Professor Hertz, and Jim had already gone down to inspect the sewers. Excellent. "This way," he whispered. A little more walking and the Hermitage was in sight. Richard huffed, tripped on a tree root and almost dropped the box. He somehow managed to land without breaking anything and began to massage his sore arms. "I need a break," he said. "No problem," Odd responded, smiling. "I'll scout ahead." He left Richard and Mr. Belpaw with a small wave and jumped to the other side of the bushes, ducking down like an Apache explorer so as not to be seen. He kept his ear. Not far ahead, beyond the curtain of trees, a squeaky metallic noise could be heard. Odd kneeled down even further and advanced away from the thicket in silence. The muddy ground stuck to his shoes, multiplying the weight of each step. He jumped behind a fallen tree trunk. The speaking became louder and louder, coming right from the Hermitage. The boy threw himself to the ground and began to crawl, digging his elbows in to advance, just like soldiers tend to do in films where they need to cross an entanglement of barbed wire. Not far away was a dry bush, which would serve as his refuge. He stuck his head through the branches, suppressing a whimper when the thorns clung to his hair, pulling forcefully on his scalp. "Ow, ow, ow!" he whispered as quietly as he could. The fence that separated Kadic from the Hermitage was gone. In its place stood a wall of metal planks that stood 6 or 7 meters high, hiding the roof of the old chalet. The wall was only partially constructed, and some soldiers in camouflage uniform were transporting several heavy planks of metal, welding them together with chains and a blowtorch. Each plank was marked with a symbol that Odd knew all too well. "Well, that's just great! The Green Phoenix has found the Hermitage!" Jeremy was in their hands, and now Ulrich, Eva, and Alita were too. Without the ones in the factory, the Hermitage scanner was the only way of getting them out of the sandboxes, and now they'd fallen right into the claws of Xana and the terrorists. At that moment, Odd heard about a furious barking. He bent to see better, and through the part of the wall that wasn't finished yet, he saw a man in jeans and a leather jacket, holding the heads of 2 enormous Rottweilers that were growling ferociously. That had to be Grigory Nutopoulos, the man who had hurt his father and his mascot Kiwi. Odd gritted his teeth. He would have loved to have confronted him, even though he was unarmed. He began to crawl backwards, but the branches of the bush were tangled in his hair, and Odd had to violently jerk back several times. "Ow!" he yelled before he could stop himself. Grigory took 2 steps towards the bush, accompanied by his 2 beasts. He then stopped dead. "Hey, you! Are you one of those snotty brats?" he said loudly. Odd stopped breathing. He heard a crazy, icy laugh from the man. "I don't want to chase you. Although my dogs are a little hungry, I need you to take an important message to Major Steinbeck. What do you call her? Ah, yes, Professor Hertz. Gregory wanted to send Hertz a message? Tell her that the Hermitage is now our territory, the secret room as well, so don't do anything stupid. And if you drive safely and respect the rules, we won't have to hurt you or your friends. The dogs pulled forcefully on their leashes, trying to run towards the bush Odd was hiding behind. They had picked up his scent and were sniffing the air greedily. Understand, kid? The man shouted. Respond, or I'll have to come over there to make sure my message has gotten into your head. Odd trembled and bit his lip. Yes, he then murmured. Understood. Ah, Gregory exclaimed. This little voice belongs to Adela Robia, doesn't it? Deliver my message, and say hello to your old man for me. The sinister man walked away with long and firm strides, dragging his 2 dogs along with him.